The morning Ashley handed me the laminated sheet of paper, I noticed she'd used a ruler to draw the lines between each rule. Straight, even, deliberate, like she'd practiced this. Like she'd sat at my kitchen table the night before, in my house, planning exactly how she was going to hand a 73-year-old woman a list of rules for living in the home I paid off with my own 2 hands. "I just think we need some structure, Helen," she said, sliding it across the counter like a waitress delivering a check, "for everyone's sake." I picked it up. Quiet hours after 8, no using the good china without asking, please knock before entering the living room even during the day, kitchen closes at 7 unless otherwise arranged, and at the bottom, underlined twice, "This is Marcus and Ashley's home. Guests are expected to respect house boundaries." Guest. I read that word 3 times before I let myself feel anything about it. I set the paper down on the counter, smoothed it flat with my palm the way you'd smooth a bed sheet, and I smiled at her. A real smile, the kind that used to unsettle people back when I taught 4th grade for 31 years, because they could never tell if I was about to laugh or about to teach them a lesson they wouldn't forget. "That's real thoughtful of you, honey," I said. "Why don't you go check the mailbox? There's something out there you're going to want to see." Her smile faltered, just a flicker, like a light bulb deciding whether it still had enough juice to stay on. She didn't know what was in that mailbox, but something in my voice told her she should be afraid to find out. She didn't move right away, so I said it again, softer this time, the way my grandmother used to say things when she already knew how a story was going to end. "Go on now. Check the mailbox." My name is Helen Graywolf. I'm 73 years old. I've lived in this house on Cherry Street in Tulsa, Oklahoma for 38 years, ever since my husband Robert and I saved every spare dollar from his job at the rail yard and my job at Eisenhower Elementary to put a roof over our heads that nobody could ever take from us. I'm Muskogee on my mother's side, and she raised me to believe that a home isn't just walls and a mortgage. It's the place where your ancestors' patience finally pays off. Robert used to say I loved this house more than I loved him, and I'd tell him that was only true on laundry day. Robert's been gone 6 years now. Heart attack. Sudden, no goodbye, just a Tuesday that turned into the worst day of my life. After he passed, this house got quiet in a way I never got used to. The hallway that used to echo with 2 sets of footsteps only had mine. I kept his flannel jacket on the hook by the back door for 2 years before I could bring myself to fold it away, and even then I didn't give it up. I just moved it to the cedar chest where I keep the things that still matter. My mother, Wilma, grew up on allotment land outside Okmulgee, and she used to tell me that every generation of our family had fought a different fight to hold on to a piece of ground that was truly, undeniably theirs. Her grandmother fought the allotment agents. Her mother fought the bank during the hard years of the 50s, paying the mortgage $2 at a time from egg money when the harvest failed. And when I was young, my mother fought her own battle, working 2 jobs so that by the time she passed, she owned her little house outright, free and clear, and she made sure I understood exactly what that freedom had cost. "A paid-off house isn't just shelter, Helen," she told me once, sitting on her porch with a cup of chicory coffee going cold in her hands. "It's proof. Proof that you were here, that you worked, that nobody can walk you off your own land the way they walked our people off theirs. You protect that proof. You don't hand it to anybody, not even people you love, without making sure your name stays on it in ink that doesn't fade." I didn't fully understand what she meant until I was much older. I understand it completely now. I have one son, Marcus. He's 41 now, but I still see the boy in him every time he laughs too loud at his own jokes, the same way his father did. Marcus married Ashley 9 years ago. I liked her well enough at the wedding. She was polished, ambitious, the kind of woman who color-coded her calendar and never let a thank you note go unwritten. I told Robert, God rest him, that she'd keep our son sharp. I didn't know yet that sharp things can cut both ways. They gave me 2 grandchildren I love more than my own life. Sophie, who's 8 and draws horses on every surface she can find, including once the inside cover of my Bible, which I forgave her for the moment I saw how carefully she'd shaded the mane. And Eli, 6, who still climbs into my lap during storms, even though Ashley's told him more than once that he's getting too old for that. 2 years ago, Marcus lost his job. The plant he'd worked at for 12 years shut its doors with 3 weeks' notice, and just like that, a family with a mortgage and 2 kids in braces had nothing coming in. I didn't think twice. I told them to sell their house, move in with me, save what they could, and get back on their feet under my roof, free of charge, for as long as they needed. That was the mistake everybody warned me about. Not taking them in. I'd do that again in a heartbeat. That's what family is for. The mistake was thinking that opening my door meant I'd still be the one who owned what was behind it. The first few months, things were fine. Better than fine. I loved having little feet running through the house again. I loved cooking for more than one plate. Ashley thanked me constantly, brought me flowers from the grocery store, told anyone who'd listen how generous I was. I remember feeling, for the first time since Robert died, like the house had a heartbeat again. But somewhere around month 5, the thank yous started thinning out. Small things first. She rearranged my kitchen cabinets while I was at my Tuesday elder circle at the community center, said it just made more sense for the pots to be where the pans used to be. She reorganized my pantry and threw out 3 jars of huckleberry preserves my cousin Dolores had put up for me because, in her words, who knows how old those were. Those were 8 months old. I'd been saving them for Thanksgiving. Then it was the thermostat. I've kept this house at 71 degrees for 38 years, and suddenly I'd walk past it and find it set to 66 with a sticky note that said, for the kids' allergies. Then it was my chair, my recliner, the one Robert bought me for our 30th anniversary, quietly relocated to the garage because it didn't match the living room anymore. I found it out there under a moving blanket like something to be ashamed of. I notice these things the way you notice a slow leak in a tire. Not dangerous yet, just something that keeps needing air and you start to wonder how long you can keep filling it before you have to ask what's actually wrong. I mentioned it to my friend Louise at the Elder Center over coffee that had gone lukewarm because we were too busy talking to drink it. She's making herself the lady of the house, Louise said, not even looking up from her crossword. In your house, Helen, you need to watch that. She's stressed. Marcus is stressed. Money's tight. People act strange when they're scared. Louise finally looked up at me, and there was something in her face I didn't like. Pity, maybe, or a warning she didn't want to say out loud yet. You've always been the one making excuses for people who don't deserve them, family included. I didn't want to hear that then. I do now. There's a particular kind of loneliness that doesn't look like loneliness from the outside. It looks like a full house. Voices in every room, shoes piled up by the door, cereal boxes crowding the counter where my own quiet breakfast used to sit. Nobody watching from the street would have guessed that the woman inside that busy, noisy home was slowly learning to make herself smaller in it. I started noticing I'd stopped humming while I cooked. Robert used to tease me about that, said you could always tell what kind of day I'd had by whether I was humming hymns or old Patsy Cline songs while I worked the stove. Somewhere in those months, I just stopped. I'd stand at the counter chopping onions in complete silence, and one evening Sophie wandered in, climbed up on the stool she always used to watch me cook, and asked, "Grandma, why don't you sing anymore?" I told her my throat was just tired that week. She was 8. She believed me, because 8-year-olds believe the people who love them. But I went to bed that night turning her question over like a stone in my hand, looking at it from every angle, wondering when exactly I'd let a slow accumulation of small indignities take my song away from me. It was around that same time that Ashley started what I privately began calling her improvements. She'd redone the guest bathroom, my bathroom, technically, since it sat right off the hallway I'd walked past for 38 years, with new towels in a shade of gray she called greige. And when I mentioned that I missed the yellow ones Robert had picked out on our 20th anniversary trip to Santa Fe, she laughed, not unkindly, but not kindly either, and said, "Helen, they were so dated. This is so much more calming, don't you think?" I didn't think anything, not out loud. I just nodded and let her have that one, the way you let a child have the last cookie because arguing over it isn't worth what it costs you in peace. But peace, I was starting to learn, is not the same thing as surrender. Peace is something you choose to spend. Surrender is something that gets taken from you a little at a time until you don't remember agreeing to give it up. The betrayal didn't arrive all at once. It arrived the way water gets into a basement, quietly through a crack you didn't know was there, until one day you're standing in 2 inches of it, wondering how you didn't smell it coming. It was a Thursday evening in March. I'd gone to bed early with a headache, and I was on my way back downstairs for water when I heard Ashley's voice from the kitchen, low and urgent, the kind of voice people use when they think the house is asleep. "She's getting more forgetful, Marcus. I'm not making it up. She left the stove on twice last month. Twice." I froze on the 3rd step from the bottom. "She's 73, Ash, not senile," Marcus said, but there was something uncertain in it, something that made my stomach drop. "I'm not saying senile. I'm saying we need to start thinking ahead. What if something happens and there's no plan? What if she falls or forgets something worse than the stove? Somebody needs to have power of attorney set up, just in case." "She's fine." "I know you don't want to hear this, but if she's not fine one day and nobody's been named, the house, everything, it all goes into some legal mess. My cousin went through this with her grandfather. It took 2 years and $30,000 in lawyer fees before the family could even sell the house to pay for his care. I'm not saying we do anything. I'm saying we should just get ahead of it. Talk to someone, an elder law attorney, just for information." I stood on that step for a long time after their voices moved on to something else. Water bottles filled, dishwasher running, ordinary sounds layered over what I'd just heard. My headache was gone. Something colder had taken its place. I want to be fair here, because Helen Graywolf doesn't deal in cheap grudges. There is nothing wrong with a family talking about the future, nothing wrong with being prepared. If Ashley had come to me directly, sat across the table and said, "Helen, we love you and we want to make sure you're taken care of. Let's talk about a plan together," I would have hugged her. I would have called my own attorney myself. But that is not what this was. This was a conversation happening around me, about me, in my own kitchen, in whispers meant to keep me from ever knowing it happened at all. I did not sleep that night. I lay in the dark thinking about my mother, who used to say that when someone starts making decisions about your life without your voice in the room, they have already decided, somewhere in their heart, that your voice doesn't matter anymore. I didn't confront them. Not yet. I'm my mother's daughter, and my mother's daughter doesn't go to war with a spoon when she could go to war with a plan. The next morning, I called my cousin Dolores, the one whose preserves had been thrown out, because Dolores's daughter Renata is a paralegal at a firm downtown that specializes in elder law. Within a week, I had an appointment with an attorney named Mr. Whitfield, a soft-spoken man in his 60s with a handshake like he meant it. I told him everything. The house rules list hadn't happened yet. That came later. But I told him about the thermostat, the pantry, my chair in the garage under a moving blanket, and the conversation on the stairs. He listened without interrupting, the way a good doctor listens before he ever reaches for a prescription pad. "Mrs. Graywolf," he said when I finished, "you are, as far as I can tell from everything you've described, completely sound of mind, fully capable of managing your own affairs, and the sole legal owner of your home. Nobody can put anything in place for you without your consent, not a power of attorney, not a guardianship, none of it, not unless a court finds you incompetent, and nothing you've told me comes close to that." "I know that," I said, "but I want it in writing. I want it so airtight that nobody in my family ever gets to whisper about my future in my own kitchen again without me in the room." He smiled at that, and I think it's the first time in that whole appointment I felt like he really saw me. Over the following weeks, we did 3 things. First, he confirmed and formally recorded that the deed to my home was solely in my name, with no encumbrances, nothing anyone could quietly attach themselves to. Second, we set up a revocable living trust with the house as its primary asset, naming me as the sole trustee for as long as I'm living and of sound mind, and naming my granddaughter Sophie as the eventual beneficiary, held in careful trust until she comes of age, with Marcus as the named successor trustee only if I become incapacitated, which would require actual medical documentation, not a whispered conversation on the stairs. Third, and this was Mr. Whitfield's idea, we sent formal certified notice to my home confirming that the trust had been established and recorded with the county so that there would be an official, dated, undeniable paper trail showing exactly when I had taken this action and why. "Why do you want it mailed to yourself?" he asked. "I can just give you the copies here." "Because," I said, "some people only believe what shows up in an envelope with a government seal on it." He laughed, the real kind. "You could have been a lawyer yourself, Mrs. Graywolf." "I raised a teenage boy through his father's death," I said. "Believe me, I've cross-examined harder witnesses than you." While Mr. Whitfield's paperwork was moving through the county, quiet as it needed to be, life at Cherry Street kept right on escalating, as if the universe wanted to make sure I never doubted my decision. Ashley's mother, Diane, came to visit for a long weekend in early April. I'd met Diane exactly twice before, both times at family gatherings where she spent more time on her phone than in the conversation. But this visit was different. Diane arrived with a tape measure and what she called just a few ideas, and by Saturday afternoon, I found her standing in my sewing room, the little back bedroom that had been mine since Robert and I first bought this house, measuring the closet with a look on her face like she was pricing out a listing. "This room gets wonderful light," she said when I noticed me in the doorway. "It'd make a beautiful nursery if you two ever decide to try for a third." "It's my sewing room," I said. "Oh, I know," she said, waving a hand like I'd misunderstood her entirely. "I just mean down the road. Things change. Rooms get repurposed." She smiled at me the way you smile at someone you've already decided doesn't need to be consulted about the decision. That evening, over dinner, Diane brought up a woman from her book club whose mother-in-law had, in Diane's words, refused to plan ahead and ended up in a memory care facility with no paperwork in place, forcing the whole family into what she called an absolute nightmare, legally speaking. She said this while looking directly at Ashley, not at me, as if I weren't sitting 3 feet away holding a fork. The table went quiet. Marcus looked down at his plate. Ashley's cheeks went pink, though whether for embarrassment for her mother or for herself, I couldn't have told you. That was the night I understood this wasn't only Ashley's fear talking. It was a whole current running underneath my own family's roof, one that had convinced itself that loving an old woman and managing her out of her own decisions were the same act of care. I went to bed that night, and for the first time since Robert died, I found myself grateful he wasn't alive to see it. He never had much patience for people who confused control with concern, and I don't know what he would have said to Diane over that chicken, but I know it wouldn't have been polite. For 3 weeks, the certified letter sat in my nightstand drawer, unopened, waiting. I hadn't decided yet what I was going to do with it. Some part of me hoped I wouldn't need it at all. Some part of me hoped Ashley would come to her senses on her own, that the whispering would fade, that maybe I'd imagined how serious it had gotten. Then came the laminated list. Looking back, I think the list was never really about house rules. I think it was a test. I think Ashley wanted to see how far she could push before I pushed back, because if I stayed quiet about quiet hours and the good china, maybe I'd stay quiet about bigger things too. Maybe a woman who accepts being called a guest in her own home is a woman who won't fight very hard when someone tries to make decisions about her future. She was wrong about that, but I understand now why she made that bet. I had spent 73 years being told that a good woman keeps the peace, swallows her pride, lets things go for the sake of the family. My mother taught me strength, but the world around me spent a lifetime teaching me to make myself smaller so other people could feel bigger. Ashley wasn't inventing that pattern. She was just the latest person to try and use it. But my mother also taught me something else. She used to say that a river doesn't get its way by shouting at the rocks. It gets its way by being patient enough to wear them down and smart enough to know exactly where the current already runs in its favor. So when Ashley slid that laminated list across my counter and called me a guest in my own house, I already had the current running in my favor. I just needed her to walk outside and find it. She stood there a moment longer, staring at me, trying to read whatever was behind my smile. Then, because curiosity is a stronger pull than pride, she set down her coffee and walked to the front door. I followed her onto the porch. It was a cool April morning, the kind where the dogwood out front still had a few pink blossoms holding on stubborn against the wind. Ashley opened the mailbox and pulled out the stack, mostly bills and coupon flyers, and near the bottom, the certified envelope with the county recorder's seal in the corner, addressed to me, Helen R. Graywolf, trustee. "What's this?" she asked, though something in her voice told me she already suspected. "Open it," I said. "It's addressed to me, but I want you to be the one who reads it." Her hands weren't quite steady as she tore the seal. She read for a moment, her eyes moving fast, then slow, then fast again, like she was reading it 3 different ways, trying to find one that meant something other than what it plainly said. "This says the house is in a trust," she said, "with Sophie as the beneficiary and you as trustee." "That's right." "When did you do this?" 3 weeks ago." "Why?" I looked at her for a long moment. I thought about the huckleberry preserves. I thought about my recliner under a moving blanket in the garage. I thought about her voice on the stairs, low and urgent, talking about power of attorney like I was already gone from my own life. "Because I heard you and Marcus on the stairs 3 weeks ago, talking about power of attorney, talking about what happens to this house if something happens to me. And instead of getting angry, instead of making a scene, I decided to make sure that no matter what anybody whispers in my kitchen, nobody gets to decide my future or my grandbaby's future without my say-so. This house was never going anywhere without my signature on it. Now it's on paper, sealed by the county, so there's no more confusion about that." Ashley went very pale. The letter shook slightly in her hand. "It wasn't like that," she said. "I wasn't trying to take anything from you. I was trying to protect the family. What if something happened and there was no plan?" "Then you ask me," I said. "You sit at my table and you say, 'Helen, we love you. Let's make a plan together.' You don't whisper about it on the stairs like I'm already gone, and you certainly don't hand me a laminated list calling me a guest in the house I paid for with 38 years of my own sweat, while you're quietly wondering how soon you'll be able to sign it over to yourself. I would never. Maybe you wouldn't have, I said, and I meant it. I still mean it, because I have never believed anyone is only their worst moment. But my mother also taught me something else. She used to say that I wasn't going to bet my grandbaby's future on maybe. Marcus came home from his new job. He'd finally landed something at a logistics company downtown, decent pay, steady hours, to find his wife sitting at the kitchen table with a certified letter in front of her and his mother across from her, both of us quiet in a way that told him immediately something had shifted. "What's going on?" he asked, setting his keys down slow, the way you do when you can feel a room's temperature before anyone tells you what happened. Ashley didn't answer, so I did. "Sit down, Marcus," I said. "It's time we all had the conversation you two should have had with me at this table 3 weeks ago, instead of on the stairs after I'd gone to bed." I watched something crumple in Ashley's face when I said that, and I watched something harden in Marcus's when he understood what I meant. "You heard us," he said quietly. "I heard enough." He sat down across from me, and for a long moment nobody said anything. Then he did something I didn't expect. He reached over and took the letter from Ashley's hands and read it himself, top to bottom, slow. "You already did this," he said finally, 3 weeks ago, before the list, before any of it." "I did." He looked at his wife. "You handed my mother a list of house rules in her own home while we were already talking about taking control of her finances behind her back." "Marcus, that's not fair. I was scared. I was trying to think ahead for all of us." "There's a difference between thinking ahead and taking over," he said, and his voice had an edge I hadn't heard from him since he was a teenager standing up to a coach who'd benched him unfairly. "You didn't talk to her, you talked about her. That's not the same thing, Ashley." Ashley started crying then, not the performance kind, the real kind, the kind that comes when someone realizes they've been caught, not in a small lie, but in the shape of who they'd let themselves become. "I just didn't want to end up like my mom," she said, her voice cracking. "She had nothing when my grandmother got sick, no plan, no paperwork, and it tore our whole family apart fighting over what should have happened. I didn't want that for us. I thought if I got ahead of it, if I handled it, I was protecting everybody." I sat with that for a moment because I could feel the truth in it even underneath everything she'd done wrong. Fear makes people reach for control because control feels safer than trust. But honey, you can't build safety for a family by taking the ground out from under the person who built it in the first place. If you were scared, you should have brought that fear to my table, not around it. Sophie and Eli were at a friend's birthday party that afternoon, which I think was a mercy none of us had planned for, but all of us were grateful for once the conversation got as raw as it did. Some things a child shouldn't have to watch their parents work through, even when the working through is necessary. "I want to understand something," Marcus said, turning the letter over in his hands like it might explain itself better from the back. "How long were you planning this before you told us? I wasn't planning to spring it on you like some kind of trap, if that's what you're asking. I was planning to protect myself and protect Sophie's future quietly, the way any reasonable person protects themselves when they overhear their own family discussing their competency behind closed doors. I didn't enjoy doing it in secret, Marcus. I hated it, but I'd already learned that whispering was apparently how decisions got made in this house now, so I decided to speak the only language that seemed to be working." "That's not fair," Ashley said, though there wasn't much fight left in her voice. "Isn't it?" I asked, and I kept my voice level because I wasn't interested in winning a shouting match, only in being heard clearly, maybe for the first time in months. You handed me a list of rules for existing in my own house, Ashley. You threw out preserves my cousin canned with her own hands. You moved my husband's anniversary gift to me into the garage under a blanket like it was an eyesore. And underneath all of it, you were quietly building a case to your own mother at my dinner table for why I couldn't be trusted to think for myself anymore. I want you to sit with that for a second. Not the trust, not the letter, that. Ashley's chin trembled. I told myself I was being responsible, she said, her voice cracking. That's the story I kept telling myself every single time. Responsible Ashley, thinking ahead, protecting the family. I didn't let myself look at it as anything else because if I looked at it honestly, I'd have had to admit I was scared of you getting old the same way I was scared of my own mother getting old. And I didn't know what to do with that fear except try to control everything around it. Fear is allowed, Ashley. I've buried a husband. I know fear. What's not allowed is letting fear write the rules for someone else's life and calling it love. Marcus reached over and took his wife's hand, not in a way that excused what she'd done, but in a way that told her he was still choosing to stay in the room with her while she faced it. Then he looked at me. I should have shut that conversation down the second it started. On the stairs, I heard the words power of attorney come out of my wife's mouth about my own mother, and instead of stopping it, I let it keep going because I didn't want to fight about it that night. That's on me too, Mom. I let you become a topic instead of a person at the table. Hearing my son say that out loud did something to the tight place in my chest that had been wound up since the morning of the laminated list. I hadn't realized how much I needed one of them to simply say out loud that I had been right to feel what I'd felt. We sat there a long time that evening, longer than any conversation we'd had since they'd moved in. Marcus asked me to walk him through everything Mr. Whitfield and I had set up, and I did. Plainly, without softening it, because I wanted my son to understand exactly how serious the ground beneath his family had gotten while he wasn't looking closely enough. Ashley apologized, not the kind of apology that's really just an excuse wearing a costume, but the kind where a person goes quiet afterward because they're doing the harder work of sitting with what they did instead of immediately trying to talk their way out of the discomfort of it. I told her something my mother told me once, the week before my own wedding, when I asked her how to build a good home with a man I loved but didn't yet fully know. She said, "A house doesn't become a home because of who owns the deed. It becomes a home because everyone under that roof agrees, every single day, to treat each other like they still matter." The moment you stop asking someone if they still matter and start deciding it for them, you've already moved out, even if your furniture's still there. I told Ashley that the deed was never really what this was about. The deed was just paper. What mattered was that somewhere along the way, she'd stopped seeing me as Marcus's mother, as Sophie and Eli's grandmother, as a whole woman with a whole life and a mind of her own, and started seeing me as a problem to be managed. And I told her that I forgave her for that, because fear does that to people, but that forgiveness and forgetting are two different gifts, and I was only prepared to give her one of them tonight. We didn't solve everything at that table. Real families don't get tidy Hollywood endings where everybody hugs and the music swells. What we did was harder and more honest than that. We agreed to start over on different terms. Not landlord and tenant, not guest and host, but what we should have been from the beginning. One family sharing one roof with one 73-year-old woman who built that roof, still holding her own key to it and holding her own voice in every decision made under it. The laminated list went in the recycling bin the next morning. I didn't need to make a show of throwing it away. Ashley did it herself, quietly, before the kids woke up for school. The week after that conversation, Marcus did something I didn't ask for and hadn't expected. He sat Sophie and Eli down, separately from the grown-up conversation, and told them, in the simple language you use with children, that this house belonged to their grandmother, that she had built it with their grandfather a long time ago, and that everyone living in it, including their mom and dad, owed her the same respect they'd want shown to their own home someday. Eli, who is 6 and takes everything literally, asked if that meant he needed to knock before coming into the kitchen, too. Marcus told him no, family doesn't need permission to be close to each other, they just need to remember whose sacrifice made the closeness possible in the first place. Sophie, who is 8 and notices more than anyone gives her credit for, came and found me in the sewing room that Diane had once measured for a nursery. She climbed up onto the little stool by the window where she used to watch me thread bobbins when she was small enough to still be curious about how a sewing machine worked. "Grandma," she said, "is this room going to stay yours?" "It's always been mine, sweetheart," I said. "It's not going anywhere." "Good," she said, with the plain satisfaction only a child can deliver. "I like it in here. It smells like you." I don't know how to explain what that did to me, hearing an 8-year-old tell me my own room smelled like myself, as if that were the most obvious, uncomplicated fact in the world, the kind of fact grown-ups spend whole legal proceedings and family arguments trying to prove. Ashley and I had a harder road back to each other than Marcus and I did, which made sense since it was her fear that had done the most damage. We didn't fix it in one conversation at the kitchen table. It took weeks of smaller moments, her asking before she reorganized anything, me offering without being asked to watch the kids on a Friday so Marcus and Ashley could go to dinner alone and remember what it felt like to be a couple instead of 2 people managing a crisis. It took her mother, Diane, calling to apologize after Marcus had a private word with her, which I'm told was not an easy phone call for either of them, though I wasn't in the room for it and didn't need to be. Somewhere in the middle of all that slow rebuilding, my yellow towels came back out of a box in the garage and returned to the guest bathroom. No explanation given, none needed. I noticed and I let myself feel glad about it, quietly, the way you feel glad about small things being set right after a long stretch of watching them go wrong. It's been 4 months now. My recliner is back in the living room, right where Robert put it the day the delivery truck brought it, and nobody's touched the thermostat without asking since. Ashley and I don't always see eye to eye. We're too different for that. And honestly, I think that's part of why my son loves her, because she challenges him the way I never quite could. But we talk now, really talk, at the table in daylight instead of in whispers on the stairs after I've gone to bed. Last month, Ashley asked me to teach her how to make my huckleberry preserves, the way Dolores taught me 40 years ago. We stood in that kitchen for 3 hours, sleeves rolled up, sugar and berries staining our hands, and she asked me questions about Robert, about my mother, about the tribal stories I grew up on, questions nobody in this family had thought to ask me in a long time. I think that was worth more to both of us than any apology could have been. My mother used to tell me that the Creator doesn't ask us to forget the wounds people give us. He asks us to plant something in the ground where the wound was and see what grows there instead of only ever staring at the scar. I planted something at that kitchen table the night the truth came out. I don't know yet what it's going to grow into, but 4 months in, it's looking a lot like a family finally learning how to be honest with each other, which, in my 73 years on this earth, has always been the rarest and most valuable harvest there is. If there's one thing I want you to carry with you from my story, it's this. Quiet dignity is not the same thing as staying silent. You can smile at the person trying to shrink you and still make sure the ground doesn't move out from under your feet. You can love your family with your whole heart and still refuse to disappear inside somebody else's idea of who you're allowed to be. Protect your peace, protect your paperwork, and never ever let anyone hand you a list of rules for a life you built with your own two hands. If this story moved you, tell me in the comments where you're watching from tonight, and tell an elder in your own life that their voice still matters. Until next time, walk gently and stand your ground.